Since the beginning of BLUELOCK, we have known one very important thing, and that is to win the Under-20 World Cup. Every selection, every player, every arc, all working towards one goal, and that is for BLUELOCK to win specifically the Under-20 World Cup. And as we are wrapping up the Neo Egoist League with its final game, we are finally getting the long-anticipated U20 World Cup, but it begs the question, what happens next? Will BLUELOCK just end after the U20? Does Isagi become the best striker in the world? Well, not exactly. You see, there are so many unanswered questions, and it's pretty ambitious to make a theory about how BLUELOCK will end or how it will continue. But what if I told you we know and can almost 100% predict what one of BLUELOCK's future arcs are? Using evidence from the manga itself, little details you may have missed, and of course my own personal theories, this is going to be one of the craziest, but at the same time most believable theories I've made. Of course, I'm talking about BLUELOCK's second World Cup. I think there is enough evidence to compile a theory on this, and it helps answer some of the biggest questions in BLUELOCK's future, so of course your boy's gotta give his best shot at it. A second World Cup means a lot of things, and we'll be answering everything about it. Like why we're having it in the first place, who will play in the World Cup, answering unknown questions about the new Gen 11 and specifically Itoshi Sai, and my predictions on both the U20 and the World Cup. A huge theory like this has a lot to go over, so let's get into it. Let's first talk about what an actual World Cup would bring, not just the U20, but an actual World Cup. There's a lot of things plot-wise, but firstly, there is no age requirement or age barrier, so this would obviously mean we would see Isagi and the BLUELOCKers face off against world-class players. This is obviously the difference between the Under-20 World Cup and a regular World Cup. They get to play players over the age of 20. The world-class players are super far ahead of BLUELOCK, and for BLUELOCK to complete its goal of creating the best striker, they would need to go against world-class players of that caliber. They need to fight against the best players in the world. This would mean we would get matches or go against world-class players like the World 5, maybe the Master Strikers, and most importantly, Julian Loki and Noel Noah. I'll go into more details later, but they're important because Loki is the prime example of a young prodigy who is also going for the #1 spot, and Noel Noah is that current #1. Loki, Noel Noah, all of the world-class players are obstacles in the way of BLUELOCK completing its goal of creating the best striker, and the best way to showcase that is in the second World Cup. So logically, in order to create the best striker in the world, you would need to go against world-class players, not just the U20, and you would also need to dethrone Noel Noah, who is the current #1. That's the most basic part of the video out of the way. Later on, we'll be tying in how players like Itoshi Sai play a huge role on why we'll get a second World Cup, so stick around until then. But getting back to it, there's also evidence for Isagi and BLUELOCK to go against these world-class players. Besides the fact that they want to be the #1 striker, they also want to reach that level of football, to be equals with the world-class players. Because we know in the last face-off against world-class players, the World 5 match, that was the opposite of equal. That was the most one-sided matches in BLUELOCK. The World 5 players seriously looked like they could care less. No one was trying. They were cracking jokes and laughing. If I was Rin, I'd be pissed too. Imagine getting absolutely demolished and they're just laughing at you. But the key takeaway from this was that towards the end of the match, they see how far the gap is, and instead of wanting to give up, they want to improve towards lessening that gap. Isagi specifically states that he wants to reach that level of football. He wants to go over to that World 2, the world-class players. And we know BLUELOCK, they aren't the type of players to get rolled by the World 5, laugh, and say go next. The BLUELOCK wasn't the friends we made along the way. We know them. They're on their egoist grind, and they want to improve towards those world-class players. So we know Isagi wants to compete against world-class players, and in this context, all of the World 5 are not part of the U20 or are all over the age of 20, so he can compete against them in a second World Cup. It only makes sense that world-class players are the quote-unquote final boss of BLUELOCK because they need to create the best striker in the world. I don't know exactly how Isagi or any of the other BLUELOCKers could complete that just from the U20 alone. So logic-wise, it makes sense because they want to create the best striker in the world, and now plot-wise, it makes sense because our main character's goal is exactly that. Loki, we know, is also going for the #1 spot, training Charles to be his personal passer for the France team, and explicitly telling Noel Noah he's going for his spot at the #1. So if Loki, who is better than any of the current BLUELOCKers, is fighting for the #1 spot, and he's playing in the World Cup, not the U20, it only makes sense for a second World Cup to happen so that they can take him on as well. Loki, I think, will be a huge rival for BLUELOCK. The fact that he's been the most prevalent world-class character besides the literal #1 makes me believe that we'll definitely see a game against Loki, specifically in the World Cup. Personally, I think this rivalry will be one of the many good things about a second World Cup, but let me know if you think we'll ever get a full match against Loki, or if you think he's just there to showcase a world-class talent. While you're down there as well, make sure to hit the subscribe button because crafting a huge huge theory like this took so long. We're literally predicting a whole future arc, and it's super ambitious. And while we're talking about ambitious, let's move into one of my personal theories, maybe what y'all have been waiting for this whole video, and that is Itoshi Sai's role and how it connects to a second World Cup. Itoshi Sai, one of the fan favorite characters in all of BLUELOCK, has been a huge mystery up until this point. His whole character has so many questions about him. We just know that Sai will play a huge role in the future of BLUELOCK. There is no way they'll toss him aside now. There is too much unfinished development with him, and that unfinished development hints towards a second World Cup. You'll see what I mean in a second. But first, we have to analyze Sai's character a little bit to understand why he's such a vital piece to the second World Cup theory. Let's quickly start with his philosophy. The first interaction we get from Itoshi Sai is the fact that he doesn't believe in Japan. He doesn't believe anyone is worthy of his passes, and that Japan will never grow. It'll always stay the same. However, this changes with BLUELOCK though, Sai being interested in Japan and the BLUELOCK project, seeing if this is how Japan will change. His character from the start is meant to be some sort of meter for Japanese football. First not believing in it, and then being interested in it, even playing in the U20 match to test how far they've grown. BLUELOCK has swayed his opinion from not even wanting to be part of the country to acknowledging that Japan can make change, and eventually I think his character will take part in that change and play for Japan again. It has been really hinted at, and we'll go over the evidence in just a second, and a lot of people do believe this as well. I personally believe that Sai will play for Japan, but just not in the upcoming U20. Instead, he'll play for Japan in the second World Cup, which is where my theory comes in. Like I said, Itoshi Sai is a meter for Japanese football. His whole character is the fact that he is the best midfielder in Japan, but rejecting Japan because it's not good enough for him. So in order for Japan to win back Sai is to quote-unquote pass his meter, by proving that they have changed and that they are good enough for him, worthy of his passes. Itoshi Sai needs to get beat by the football he rejected in order to acknowledge Japan. You know how Aiku said he is the final wall? Nah, Itoshi Sai is literally the final wall, specifically for Japan and Itoshi Rin. And how he'll be the final wall is to be their opponent during the U20 World Cup. It'll be the final test of Japanese football versus Sai to bring him back. This could work in a couple ways. Itoshi Sai has been living in Spain for a couple of years now, and just plot-wise, they can make him play for Spain. Spain could definitely be an opponent for Japan in the U20 alongside the obvious Germany pick with Kaiser, but there's way more reasons than just that. Spain might just have some secret powerhouses as well. Sai's dream of becoming the best striker was broken by somebody else, so we can see development on that end as well. Why Itoshi Sai gave up his dream on becoming the best striker in the world. He quote said that the world was huge, so of course someone outside of Japan humbled him. Perhaps it was a striker from his club or from the U20 Spain team that humbled Sai and showed him that he was completely better than him, forcing him to switch positions. Itoshi Sai, who is a young prodigy, literally acknowledged that this player was better than him and changed his dream because of it. And not gonna lie, that is just way too scary. One hell of a way to hype up a player, literally an Avengers level threat. Sai has so many questions and development that they can go into. I really think he's gonna be an important character for the future of BLUELOCK and plot-wise as well. And I haven't mentioned Rin or the brother rivalry up until this point because there is so much evidence to cover for it, and again, important for our second World Cup theory. After Sai's goal of becoming the #1 was crushed, we know he came back with a new goal to become the #1 midfielder in the world, and also a little text box that literally answers everything. Itoshi Sai's new goal is for Rin to become the #1 striker. By being a midfielder and helping him out, it was said in this small panel that I think a lot of people overlooked, indicating that he's willing to help Rin. But Rin, being the little kid, obviously has a breakdown. Sai gives him motivation by shutting him out so he can improve. You guys know this already, being the mean brother and literally Itoshi Rin's character up until this point. Rin's development and whole goal is to be Itoshi Sai, and Itoshi Sai's whole goal is to make Rin the #1 striker because he obviously believes Rin has what it takes rather than himself. Remember that Sai is a meter both for Japanese football and for Rin, so they'll eventually need to face off. By facing Sai in the U20, you would literally hit two birds with one stone. Rin and Sai's characters would literally be solved, and not to mention, it's just really good writing if they play it out this way. If Sai loses in the U20, that shows that Japanese football has changed. Not can change like he said in the U20, but has changed because they ended up beating him. Again, the meter thing again. Rin would also be his brother Sai and finally be acknowledged by him, completing his goal and one of the biggest rivalries in BLUELOCK. Sai would complete his goal of helping Rin become a capable striker when Rin beats him, and will help him become the #1 like the original plan before. And if Spain does have that striker that humbled Sai and Japan wins, or specifically Itoshi Rin wins, I think it would be good revenge or a good get back. Because Japan has changed and because Rin has changed, Sai will most likely turn back to Japan, completing his character arc from not even acknowledging it to going back to playing for it. I'm absolutely beautiful writing. I think if this theory were to play out, it would give such a satisfying conclusion to almost every single character, and it would be a good way to tie in a second World Cup. So Sai won't play in the U20 World Cup. In fact, he'll probably be an opponent for it, but I believe during the actual World Cup, we could definitely see Itoshi Sai making a return to Japan and playing in the World Cup. He'll be reunited with Rin and will also help Rin become the #1 striker, like said before, which is a huge threat for Isagi and the #1 spot. It keeps the rivalry ongoing, and it gives Rin a passer as well, because Isagi has like Hiyori, Corona, and at this point maybe even Kunigami. The whole facility is around this guy. So Sai and his whole character hint towards a second World Cup, because he'll finally acknowledge and play for them, and then obviously helping Rin as well, his original goal. This way we get Itoshi Sai playing for Japan again, what BLUELOCK has been hinting at from the start, just not in the U20. Some evidence to back up this theory as well, the Neo Egoist League is picking the top 23 players, and as much as Sai can call up Ego and most likely take a spot on the U20 team, he'd be kicking someone out of the top 23 who grinded their way up to make it. And that means the 23rd player who is at the edge like Raichi, Nanase would get kicked out. It just wouldn't make sense, or it wouldn't be fair. So I think Itoshi Sai will instead play for the second World Cup, as it just makes sense and he doesn't screw anyone else over. He could also help go against the threat that is Loki and Charles. Loki, as we know, is the pinnacle of a young talent. He has already passed the new Gen 11 level and is going for the #1 spot, while training Charles, the young prodigy, in PXG. The whole reason why he went into the NEL was to train Charles to be his personal passer. Charles and Loki will be an insane duo going into the future of BLUELOCK. Charles as well has been getting a lot of development, more than any of the other characters from the other teams. For example, we didn't see any new characters from Barcha besides Lavinho. Augie was a huge disappointment from Manshine, and he seems to be getting more development than Lorenzo, who is already established as a good player. I think Charles' character, as discussed in my Charles New Gen 11 video, is the fact that he isn't good right now, but will be in the future. That's why he is in the Neo Egoist League, so he can level up and be on Loki's level. He started rivalries with Isagi and Hiyori. He also has a good personality, more than other players that we've seen, like Augie for example, and obviously his passes are absolutely insane. So I think Charles will be an important character, or a reoccurring character, for the future of BLUELOCK, and not just some one-off character like Augie. If Bastion Munich does beat PXG here, I could see Charles wanting to train and get better to surpass BLUELOCK, specifically Hiyori and Isagi, since he does have rivalries with him, and since he is Loki's personal passer, we won't see Charles again until we see Loki again. Loki isn't playing in the U20 World Cup, as we know he is already playing for the national team, so the next time we'll see Loki is in the actual World Cup. Loki is a huge rival for BLUELOCK, the peak of young talent, and right alongside him is the other young prodigy, Charles, who will be his personal passer for the second World Cup. And yeah, that would be a huge threat. Loki, who is already broken as is, having a personal passer in Charles who would get even more development than his current self, and have a rivalry with BLUELOCK, it would just increase the hype for their eventual matchup against Japan or BLUELOCK. Alright, the next logical thing we can talk about is the fact that most of the players are already super good, or nearing the new Gen 11 level already. Isagi, Rin, Barou, and characters like that have already shown feats worthy of new Gen 11 level, so once they participate in the U20, they'll need to level up even more to be world-class level. Everything so far has been hinting towards BLUELOCKers reaching this world-class level, and all fighting to get that #1 spot. And how they'll do this is most likely with a club system, which is still very unknown in BLUELOCK. I think we'll have an arc maybe after the U20, where the players train in clubs, because it's been so prominent throughout the Neo Egoist League. I mean, that's the whole salary system, for God's sake. It's very unknown what they want to do with clubs, to be honest. It could just show salaries and mean nothing else. The way they've been hinting at it, it could play a key role in being the next arc, which develops the characters into world-class talents. I would honestly love to see an arc like this. It would add a lot to the story and give us a lot of missing pieces. For example, showing us the rest of the new Gen 11, since only 3 have been revealed. And since this is before the World Cup, there could be new rivalries which could carry on into the actual World Cup. Maybe hint towards a new country being a complete powerhouse, or a huge threat for BLUELOCK and Japan. I think the problem with the Neo Egoist League and BLUELOCK in general is that each country or team really only has 1 or 2 players that are huge threats. The rest of them are completely forgettable. Compare that to Japan, we've seen all of BLUELOCK grow up, develop, and become literal men, so the whole team we already know. I think a prime example of this would be the U20 versus BLUELOCK match. Every single player on BLUELOCK we did know, and the only threats on the U20 squad were Aiku, Sai, and maybe Sendo if you count him. Everyone else, like Wakatsuki, are completely forgettable or didn't add much. They weren't threats at all. This is kind of the case for the NEL as well. Barcha had literally no players besides maybe Picasso. Manshine had Augie, and Ubers had Lorenzo. There was really only one powerhouse for each team. So by the time the Blue Lockers go back and play for Japan, there will really only be one powerhouse that we know of per team. The rest would be a bunch of fodder. That's why I think they'll go up against Spain in the U20, who has Sai who can more than compensate for the others, and also the unknown striker who humbled him. Germany at least has some other players like Grimm, Ness, and obviously Kaiser, so at least the offense we know would be good. Getting back to it though, I think clubs would fix this in time for the second World Cup. More players would get developed in other countries, maybe even revealing more new Gen 11 players, and the whole team or most of the team would be a threat instead of just one or two powerhouses per team. This would make the games even less predictable and would obviously bring more hype to the matches. The more players we know, the more hype the games are. This is why PXG is the most hyped up game in the NEL, because it had the most players we know and love. Alright, so I think the fact that the Blue Lockers and specifically Isagi want to become the #1 striker in the world, and the fact that they also want to reach the world class level, hint towards the second World Cup where they'll face off against them. Ayumi Toshiside's character, as well as Charles and Loki, all prominent rivals, the second World Cup is looking like a big green light as all the development would get completed there. It would also mean we get more development and new characters, maybe even more than new Gen 11 players, maybe in some sort of form of a club arc. That way it would showcase and increase the talent and threat of new or existing countries in the World Cup. That's my theory on why I think Blue Lock will have 2 World Cups. There's a lot of evidence pointing towards it, and I really had to dig deep for some of them, but I personally think a second World Cup would happen. Keep in mind as well, Blue Lock was also the best-selling manga during 2023, so why kill the cash cow? Anyways, if you watched to the end, I appreciate you guys so much. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button because this is literally the most ambitious video I've ever made. It literally took me 5 days to script this. Thank you for the support as always and for always watching to the end. My name's Hiryo, and I'll see you guys next one.